All right. Hello, everybody. We're getting everybody admitted from the waiting room here. So hang with us just a second. All right. I think everyone is in. So welcome, everyone, to another edition of an online artist talk presented by the Maloof. I am Seth Pringle, Program Manager at the Sam and Alfreda Maloof Foundation for Arts and Crafts in Alta Loma. Today, our guest artist presenter is David Amico. And if this is your first artist talk, that we've done several every Friday since we closed temporarily. We're hoping to reopen soon, so stay tuned for that. But we started this artist talk series as a kind of an extension of a photography exhibition we have in our gallery called A Thriving Artist Community, photographs of artists in their homes and studios. And we've been having online artist talks from the artists who are featured in that exhibition. So we'll have a Q&A at the end after David gives his presentation. So if you'll see a chat box at the bottom of your screen, if you're not too familiar with Zoom, if you click on the chat box, you can type your questions in there at any time. You could type them in now if you want, or anytime throughout the talk, and then we'll get to those at the end. And then you also might want to adjust, if you're not familiar with Zoom, in the top right corner of your screen, you should have a view option. You'll probably want to use speaker view, and that will focus your screen on whoever's talking at the time. David Amico is an abstract painter. He is a professor of art at Claremont Graduate University, where he was a professor of mine, actually, full disclosure there. So he received his BFA from CSU Fullerton. Since then, he has received numerous awards and grants for his work, including the Cartier Fellowship in Paris in 1992, Paula Krasner Grant in 1995, Presidential Scholars Distinguished Teacher Award in 1997. He has established himself as one of LA's most influential contemporary painters. His first major group exhibition was held at PS1 in New York in 1976, and his first major solo exhibition was held in that same year at New Space Gallery in Los Angeles. Throughout his career, Amico has exhibited in galleries throughout the United States, as well as Singapore, Switzerland, and Mexico. Amico has also been prolific in his art commentary, appearing in a wide variety of publications, including the Los Angeles Times, LA Weekly, Art Week, and Art Space. He is represented by Art Collection Development under the directorship of Douglas Christmas, and has had numerous solo exhibitions at Ace Gallery in Beverly Hills. So welcome, David. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Seth.
All right. I'm going to start the slideshow here from my screen. Okay.
So these images, should I start?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
These images are from an exhibition that CGU Claremont did in China at TAFA, Tianjin Academy of Fine Arts in 2018. It was David Pagel, Rachel Lagwitz, myself, and two students, Tommy Burns and Aurelia Ruiz. We were all included in this. And so it was an experience going to China. Of course, we were with my friend Yi Kai, who was also in the Thriving Artists Community Art Photo Show. It was so, I've been to China 3 times now, and I really enjoy it, mainly because of Yi and his wonderful ability to take care of us. This work is post 2016, which was my last show, and these paintings are about 6 feet by 4 feet. There were a couple of other paintings involved in the show. I have one example of one of them here. But again, it was just great going to China, meeting their students, talking to the faculty, and just, we had a wonderful time. It was very warm, but very enjoyable. These works were a part of the, is this a catalog? Oh, this is the 2016 show, the last show that I did at ACE in Beverly Hills. This is a small painting. The nature of my work is explained in the paragraph before this that the gallery uses, but essentially I deal with an unrestricted style of working. Postmodernist in the sense that the work is complex, free association, poetic presentation, material exploration, themes mostly focused on downtown, living in the urban artist corridor. We can just go through these sets. The titles of my show are generally come about with a theme that I have in mind. We're starting from again, I'm looking at what surrounds me in my environment. This particular show, Hard Places, I was concerned about the phenomenon of the difficulty it was to maintain a studio downtown. I knew that I would be moving after the show from my old studio, and wasn't sure where I was going to go. As it turns out, I only moved a block away. And I've lived downtown in the artist corridor, if you will, for close to 40 years. But I've watched and been a part of the change that's taken place. So these works sort of reflect what I'm looking at during a period of time I've done. It takes me about 2 years to prepare a show. And I really appreciate the freedom that I'm allowed to explore those shows in a very kind of poetic, non-linear kind of way. All of these images come from observation, combination of observation and innovation. Technically, I work with different kinds of things, but they're generally, stylistically, I believe, consistent. Although a lot of people suggest that I don't have a style, and I'm always amused by that. You can see the dates on the bottom and the size. My typical size is 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, slightly larger in this exhibition. And again, Ace Gallery always had large spaces, was one of the first galleries to expand into very large spaces. And the freedom of making pieces large is actually something that I enjoy. So it's this work, back wall, was inspiring for the whole show. It actually represents the side of a building that had been cut, and different panels of wood were placed over it to shore it up when they were expanding the First Street Bridge. And so that sort of narrative that is implied kind of runs through the theme of what Hard Places was about. Sort of what was happening to the artist studios in the area with all the construction and provocative, living conditions being developed. Again, I'm inspired by a sort of industrial type of imagery. I've always enjoyed that kind of distance. I like the fact that I'm looking at things that are made by people or places or situations, and I read into them in a narrative way. And they're pretty consistent in the abstract aspect of them. Large scale, you can walk up to the paintings and really engage them. And I'm looking for basically a neutral experience with a certain kind of passion when it comes to the overall construction of the show. Again, titles and sizes are in the corner. Before I get too far along, I do want to thank the Maloof Foundation and Tom and Tony Bostic for taking the photos that are in that exhibition and including me in this show. And I also want to thank Seth for his directing this presentation. So again, this is the last three major shows I did were forays in Beverly Hills. They were very large exhibits, over 20 pieces. Sometimes they had a second presentation with additional pieces. And the first major show of this scale was in 2007. Then I did another one in 2011, 12, and then another one, this one in 2016. I have a couple of these pieces in the studio that we'll look at later. It seems odd talking to my paintings and set in the corner. I've been doing these Zoom meetings with my students at school, and I've really kind of enjoyed them. An opportunity to let people into my environment and not just meet them on an academic occasion in the studios. I do a lot of observation and a lot of formal sort of considerations go into my selection of work. Again, I kind of consider the installations to be sort of poetically inspired.
David, can you talk about your process a little bit in terms of how you get from your reference objects to your paintings? Do you use photography?
Yes.
Or what's that like?
And I've been using photography since the 70s when I was appropriating cartoons and doing some figurative work. Primarily as a research tool. And back in those days, we used slide projectors, and I would sit in the studio with a slide projector and just layer one after another image on certain paintings and get an idea of what to work with. So sometimes these paintings are a collection of several images. Sometimes they're not. It just depends on what I'm working with. Now I went from slides to printing out digital images and using the printer and using an overhead projector. I did that for many years. And now I'm moving into the electronic digital projector. The thing that happens in the way that I work, though, is that I totally distort the photographic aspect of what I'm looking at. What I'm really looking at through that R&D, research and development, is just ideas for formal considerations. When I start applying the paint to them, they take on a life of their own. They don't become they're not a representation any longer. They engage in fairly heavy, sometimes heavy applications of paint, and they completely change. So they're not, the photograph is just a sort of tool of note-taking for me. And I like the fact that I'm not theorizing the work, but I'm allowing this area of interest to inspire me. Sometimes the works work out, sometimes they don't. When you try to transfer a photograph to a painting, it doesn't always work. So it's funny. You learn how to work with it. You learn how to. This is where I believe that the work really takes on a postmodernist kind of ideology. It's not pop. It's not a process-oriented approach. It's not any one of these things. It's a combination of things. So there's a lot of transformation, formal organization, considerations with expression, and even the application is a little bit detached. It's not meant to be personal. At the same time, when you set up an exhibit like you're looking at now, you want people to be able to move easily from one image to the next and not get tripped up about the fact that they're not processed the same way. And to me, painting still offers a lot of conceptual resource. It's not just a traditional material, which is what I was sort of taught in school. When I was in school, I really looked at art povera, the movement itself, and the alternative materials. And a lot of my early work was with a lot of heavy collage. And I've learned actually, I think over the years, how to paint with that same kind of freedom. So I don't really, I'm not a painter's painter in the sense of being restricted with a certain kind of signature. And I do think painting can be exciting with that approach. So this was an installation at Beverly Hills. I enjoyed showing there. It was one giant room. And we could set up quite a few pieces in the big room, and then there were two small rooms adjacent to that. And again, it's this idea of art being a creative experience and exploring that I find most gratifying. I do have to thank Douglas for allowing me to have this kind of freedom. And we've worked together now for some close to 35 years.
Do you feel like having that stability of a relationship with your a gallerist has given you more freedom, where you're not having to or where that trust gives you more freedom in what you make?
Absolutely. When I first met Douglas, he was sort of referred to me by someone, and he called me, came by the studio that I was at the time. And he came in. I was wrapping up paintings to go to an exhibit in Pittsburgh. And he made me unwrap everything. He didn't say anything. He just looked at all the work and spent a good amount of time, but did not comment. And he left. And that was it. And I thought, okay, that was interesting. And then 3 days later, I got a call from him. And he said, I'd like you to stop by the gallery and talk to you about representing it. And so it's been like that for, Doug doesn't comment on the work. I asked him one time, with consideration of the other artists he was showing, I asked him one time, I was a little frustrated with being in these shows with all these minimal artists. And he reminded me that I didn't have to worry about that was his decision, and I should go back to my studio and make my own work. So we've had a very interesting relationship. He's been, that freedom comes from the encouragement to do these exhibitions, work on a large scale, and I feel very grateful that I've had this opportunity in Los Angeles to do this. The images we're looking at now were part of Factory Park, a show that I did on 11/12 in Singapore. And so I was putting together that show for LA, and we met the people from Reese Gallery in Singapore, and they selected work, and I went there to do an exhibit. And again, roughly the same scale, 8x6. And, there was issues about doing large-scale paintings years ago. But when you're working with these kinds of spaces, very large galleries, you really need to take command of it. The work needs to kind of have a life of its own. In order for that to happen, it needs to have some scale. And I really don't like working. Even when I was an undergraduate, I was working fairly large when I got involved with this kind of abstraction. So, again, I do believe there's a consistency with regards to what I'm looking at, what I'm responding to. I'm taking into consideration things that are overlooked, oftentimes not considered important. I like living in this kind of industrialized area of the city that gets trafficked with with a lot of freedom that's associated with it.
And so living downtown LA, how do you think the environment has affected the way you paint, other than just the objects that you're painting, or is that kind of inextricable?
Oh, it's influenced me quite a bit, and Los Angeles is very interesting. When I was in New York, it was as a graduate. Um, it was very difficult to find working space. I was living in Queens for a while I was in school, and then I dropped out. Susan Weil, an artist that I worked with at school, got me an opportunity to have a studio at PS1. She was Rauschenberg's first wife and an artist herself. And that was a real break for me. At the same time, I had been talking to Jean St. Pierre, who was running New Space Gallery on the West Coast and keeping track of me. And it was difficult to make work. This is an installation from the show I did in 2007 called Drip Trace. Just to give you an idea of these exhibits that were involved in Beverly Hills. Working in New York was hard. I was there for about 4.5 years. I had a studio at PS1. I was attempting to maintain some kind of production, but it was difficult. My first show was done in New York and brought out to the West Coast. By that time, Jean had sold the gallery to Johnny Gordon, and I was in a room there with her directorship. And then I did a second show with them in '78 with Jean St. Pierre, actually, and a poet friend of his, Peter Haft. But coming back to Los Angeles and discovering the availability of studios was just unbelievable. I mean, my first studio was on Broadway, not too far away from where I am now. And it was the 5th floor of the Desmond's department store. And it was very inexpensive by comparison to New York. And I just was making all kinds of stuff, putting things together, collaging things that I found. And really the environment in Los Angeles was just conducive to driving around, going through the alleys, picking up pipes or chunks of cement and doing things really in an open-ended way. There were not very many people operating at all. There were a couple thousand artists maybe down here, and that's about it. Between the artists and the homeless, everyone was gone after 5 o'clock from the businesses and whatnot. So we really knew that we were developing an area of these cities, somewhat like Soho in New York, but much, much different. Los Angeles really offers a lot of freedom because we're so flat. And so it definitely had an influence on the ability to engage in this kind of work. I mean,
So do you want to show us around your space now?
yeah, I get a little nervous about talking about the work too much. Just to let you know about where I'm at. This is basically the downtown corridor that I'm in now. That American flag off in the distance, that's right around the corner from where my first studio was. And of course, this is the area where seagulls and all kinds of people gather. One of the nice things about being here is the spaces themselves. How is that reading, Seth?
That looks good, yeah.
Okay. When I lost my other studio after being in it for 30 years, we were hard pressed to try to find another location. And so, strangely enough, this building a block away was available. I remember this building from the early 80s. And I want to kind of make sure that you can see the work in its entirety here. And these are some of the paintings that were in hard places. When I walked, me and a couple neighbors had come down to this building several times to look at it when we found out that it was available. And I wasn't too sure because my last building didn't have all the missions around it like this one does. And I was a little skeptical. You don't take anything for granted in this area. But you always treat everybody respectfully. We're all kind of integrated in the same, kind of living space. So I came to the building 3 times. The last time I saw this unit had just become available. It was a sweatshop before. And when I walked in and saw how much light the studio had, I really just fell in love with it. Views to the west, skyline. It's healthy to kind of be down here and be able to look at your surroundings.
You typically have finished work kind of surrounding you in your studio while you're working?
Well, this studio, since I left the present Ace Gallery that has gone under change, I took my inventory back. I had moved here in 2016, and actually this was the only studio I had at the time. But because I left the gallery and retrieved my inventory, I developed another studio downstairs. And so I came in here, and the only requirement that I had was that I was able to put together about 12 to 14 pieces at a time. And so this worked out fine. I could use the columns and the wall. But when I took the inventory back, which was in the last 2 years, I've done that, I really had to acquire another studio in the building, which I was able to do. And that is where I have a working space as well. So I work upstairs. I basically finish things up here, and I work downstairs as well. So it's, I used to have a garden in my old building. Now I have one plant. But again, clear day, you can basically see the Palos Verdes and watch the planes coming in.
So I'm gonna share some of the questions from the chat box, and if anyone else has some more questions, type them into the chat at the bottom. And Kendall is asking, he says, you seem to incorporate pre-figures or even pre-calligraphic lettering. Is that intentional?
Only if they're interesting. If there's any messaging, no. If there's anything identifiable, no, I don't. That's not intentional. I'm looking for the abstract nature of things. this one painting here that I used, but actually I did a bigger version of it in China. The director came to see me from the school, and he liked that painting, so I made another one in China for him. This was a tiny bit of scribbling on a wall, no larger than this, at the base of a wall in Chinatown when I went to have dim sum with a friend of mine. And so I'm constantly looking at things around me. I used to take walks every morning from my other building when it wasn't so hectic down here. And just early in the morning, just looking at things and just being intrigued with, just the simplest stuff. It was always it. And again, I don't want to be attached to any kind of overt messaging, but I do want a kind of implied narrative involved in the work, mostly themed around, again, this sort of urban post kind of transformation that's taking place, and it's been taking place for quite a while now. And maybe we're not done. I mean, I think recent years, a lot of artists have moved away from these areas because of the affordability. And so I think there's a new engagement involved now. And I've had, ideas about moving to some abandoned warehouse in the middle of the desert. Who knows? I mean, I still kind of like these environments for it. It's just, no restrictions. It's, you can paint large, you can make a mess, clean it up. Obviously.
So let's see. Another question was about, do you always work on large canvases? I know there was at least one small one in the slideshow, but are they are they usually the large ones that we see around you, or do you have some smaller works that you're always working on tucked away somewhere?
I do have some smaller works that I'm focusing on now. The gallery, being with Ace since '87, and it was one of the first large-scale galleries, eventually into 2 galleries. It was very difficult to do smaller work and show smaller works and show them there. So, but I was making large work even as an undergrad when I was at Fullerton. I was making 9 by 12-foot paintings there with rug paddings and sticks coming out of them. And part of the reason I left New York is because I could never get that freedom there. It was too expensive and space was very hard to find. And that's eventually why I came back to LA. I had a relationship here with Jean St. Pierre and his gallery. I wanted to work, and I was tired of trying to conceptualize stuff, in a small format. So I've always gravitated towards the large scale, even from a very young age. I'm going to see what happens with these smaller pieces.
To me, I've been thinking about your work in terms of how you engage with the objects in kind of a Zen sense of understanding, just contemplating an object to understand it and kind of understand, its energy or its kind of individual life force. Do you think about Zen in terms of your paintings?
Zen-like ideas, yeah. I think it's, again, that's the part of abstraction that I enjoy. I was in Japan one time, and there was just this alleyway that around the corner from where I was staying, and there was this restaurant, and there was a vent on the wall, and it had dripped this grease down this vent for some time, and it just was so beautiful. These browns, and I just, to me, I fell in love with that, and it's sort of, there is this contemplation of process and just, the contemporary circumstance that you run across. I don't think of, I don't like the word urban. I mean, because to me, that's just so undefined. It's nature. There's the nature to all of this. And yeah, I have been accused of, and of kind of having an Asian influence. I love Chinese painting, and I miss Chinese food. But yeah, there's.
What about in terms of speaking of having a personal style, like you said, some people refer to your work as being without a signature style or something. What about in terms of color? So much of a kind of a signature style, I think, can be determined by color palette. Are you is your color kind of true to the objects usually, or are you making changes to the colors, and what's that process like?
I'm making changes. Yeah, it's not. There may be a hint of something going on in the photograph, but the color comes as another. It's a whole other departure. Yeah, a lot of these things are not as colorful. And again, I'm trying to transform these formal observations that have an implied narrative to me. And so the color helps me transform things. That large yellow painting you saw that was in the Art Places catalog, that wall that I took an image from to get that painting started was actually green. And so, I'll totally switch off the color. What I'm looking for is just that experience. Like I was explaining with that grease stain that I'm standing in front of and staring at, and just, wondering how many meals the restaurant had served to create that. It's just wonderful. I mean, it didn't seem, distasteful to me. It seemed like, okay, so how did that get there? And that kind of sense of discovery you can only find in this kind of area that doesn't really have a defined purpose, but operates on several different levels. And to me, that feels comfortable with art post 70s to where we are today.
Devin asks, what's your current relationship with Little Tokyo community today?
I used to walk up there, all the time, but now you really have to drive. I'm 1 block south of where I used to be. So you really have to drive, and everything's closed. I used to go there every Sunday, and I had several friends that were much older than me. I used to meet with them, and I learned a lot from them. They were really good friends, but they've all passed away. So I've kind of lost touch with the community. Every once in a while, I'll stop by that one watering hole that I used to go to, but everything has changed. Change is good, but I miss it, Devin.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you more about the change of the neighborhood and your area. Being in the same spot for so long, I'm sure there's been tremendous changes all the time, but especially I would think recently in the past I don't know, 5 to 10 years. Seems like there's a lot of development happening downtown, and you're kind of bearing witness to all that.
Well, I've been fortunate. I mean, um, I'm not, this building, because it was surrounded by missions, was not something that people wanted to engage in. There were 4 of us from my old building that came down here and did find spaces in the building that we liked. The environment going west from me, where you saw those buildings, the lower buildings, they've all turned into condominiums. Um, they've advertised a loft-like experience. They've allowed people to have pets. And so if you go over to Spring Street or Main Street, which used to be deserted when I was first down here, they're full of people walking their dogs and at all times. It's much more friendlier now for women to be on the street, single women. The engagement with restaurants and coffee houses and all kinds of things is pretty amazing. I've gone over there a couple of times, but it's way too normal for me. So I'm being pushed along with everyone else in sort of away from there. As you look south from where I am, towards the Flower District and the Fashion District, there are a few artists that are moving into those areas, finding places like we have here. And that kind of gives us that familiarity of having more freedom when everyone goes home for work and we're sort of left there. I think it's the Bendix building is down there. There are artists in that building, but it's becoming very pricey. So it just depends what's going to happen. When I was originally looking with my neighbors from our old building in 2016, when we knew we had to leave, I really was expecting to go out to the Valley or Claremont, and I was looking all over, and I really couldn't find anything that was really affordable. It was all very expensive. I'm essentially paying the same rent I was before where I am now. Again, industrial space in Los Angeles is very expensive. So it's not you really do have to sacrifice to make this kind of work.
We have a question from Trang. Do you feel a bit more confined working with smaller paintings?
No, I just haven't done it. I had a bunch of smaller panels downstairs, and I'm now in the process of stretching them and working on them. I don't know if I'll show them one at a time, though. I mean, I don't know. You know, right now I'm just exploring things. But this move from being in one place for 30 years to now being in this studio for 4, you know, I'm sort of open to whatever I'm thinking about. My ceilings here are 12 feet. They used to be 16. I used to have a lot of skylights in that building. This room has a lot of windows. No, I don't really. I haven't really made any decision about, you know, small or big. Nothing is, you know, nothing's become secure.
We have another question from Devin asking, having been a teacher and mentor to multiple generations of abstract painters, are there any recent reflective changes in the way young artists are approaching painting now in contrast to the past?
That's a good question, Devin. I would like to say no, but I do think there's a lot more attention to personal feelings now. It's really hard to get people to think of their art, you know, outside of this personal kind of framework. I mean, I don't know. There's personal choices, but the art becomes something else, I think, with abstraction, to sort of avoid that. And I mention that, but I don't, you know, the students always surprise me with their work, and eventually, especially at Claremont, with the way that that program is set up. It's amazing what they do when they're given a studio and they can talk amongst themselves as well as listening to experienced faculty. So they're not disappointing in terms of the work itself. They may talk about it differently, but it's not, the work itself really speaks for itself. And that's amazing. I still believe in art.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. Did you have any other closing comments?
No, I had all kinds of plans, but I thought this just kind of drifted along, and I hope it's been informative. I want to thank you again, Seth, for this, and the Maloof Foundation, Devin and Tran, and anyone else who remembers. Yes, this is what I used to look like when I was 20 years old. But I'm no longer 20 years old. Take care. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was great, David. Awesome. So yeah, we'll be wrapping up. If you joined midway and maybe you missed part of it, we'll be posting the recording of this to our YouTube channel in the next couple days, and you can see our previous talks on our YouTube channel. Just type in the Maloof. And next week on Friday, same time, 4 p.m., we'll have CJ Jillick, ceramicist, will be sharing her work. So be sure to check that out, and you know, keep up with us on social media or email, and hopefully we'll be letting you know about when we will reopen the Maloof soon. But in the meantime, we thank you guys for joining us online for these artist talks. All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.